From crafting luxury clothing for the wealthy and elite figures to producing affordable and durable clothing accessible to all, Hugo Boss, simply known as Boss, has been one of the most trusted and reliable brands for several decades. However, the company has a dark history that could shatter its very foundations the same way it built them. This video explores the origins of Hugo Boss's empire, a multi-billion-dollar fashion outfit built off the unpaid labor of prisoners of the Second World War and the exploitation of Nazi-conquered territory. But most importantly, we shall dive into how the company managed to evade the repercussions of its dark past. The 8th of July, 1885 might be a regular day in human history to most people, but to a select unfortunate few, it marked the birth of the most dreadful master and businessman they would ever serve. Hugo Boss was born on this day in Metzingen, a town popular for its booming textile industry, to Louise and Heinrich Boss. Hugo was the youngest of 5 children, and since his only sibling who survived infancy was a sister, he was chosen as heir to his parents' lingerie shop. In his early years, he apprenticed as a merchant, where he learned more about clothing and textiles, and after his apprenticeship, he served in the military between 1903 and 1905. Once his military service was over, he moved to Konstanz, where he worked in a weaving mill. Hugo, however, didn't endure his new station for long. 3 years following the end of his military service, in 1908, he took over his parents' lingerie shop at the tender age of 23. Hugo ran his family's business diligently until the start of the First World War in 1914. Being a German nationalist at his age, he enlisted in the army and served on the front lines through the course of the war. However, he was never promoted past the rank of corporal. Hugo took a more ambitious initiative when he continued to run his family business after the war. He decided to start his own clothing company. In 1924, the clothing company known as Hugo Boss AG, named after Hugo, was founded, thanks to financial support from 2 other manufacturers from his hometown. The company was quickly able to employ 20 to 30 workers who manufactured jackets, work clothing, sportswear, and raincoats by hand. Business was booming, and the company acquired deals to supply the National Socialist Party with shirts and uniforms. However, this success was short-lived. Thanks to the Versailles Treaty and the League of Nations, the winners of the First World War, Germany, lost all of its international colonies, 10% of its original territory, and billions of dollars in reparations. The country faced a significant economic crash, which was only made worse by the Great Depression. Germany's national debt was on the rise, and the country's currency, the marks, was losing value. Boss's customers could no longer afford its products, and its sales plummeted. Hugo Boss's clothing factory was facing bankruptcy in 1931 and the imminent closure of its company. However, negotiations with the factory's creditors that same year kept the dream alive. Hugo may not have had the means of production he had when he first started, but he was left with 6 sewing machines that kept the business afloat for the time being. The year 1931 saw a lot of significant events in the growth of Hugo Boss as a company. From almost filing for bankruptcy to working with just 6 sewing machines to joining the National Socialist Party, the Nazi Party for short. At Hugo's hearing during the post-war denazification progress that year, Hugo Boss declared that he had become a member of the Nazi Party because it promised to do something about the rampant unemployment that ravaged the economy. This move by Hugo saw his company receive orders from the party to manufacture and supply them with uniforms. This became the salvation of the company. To many, Hugo only became a Nazi because he saw an opportunity for growth in the Third Reich. However, others believed he genuinely believed in their cause. In Roman Koster's study on Hugo Boss, published by the Hugo Boss Group itself, it's claimed that before Hugo Boss admitted he wouldn't have gotten the orders that saved his company if he hadn't joined the party, he claimed to believe that the Nazi Party would alleviate their growing unemployment. By 1932, Hugo Boss had become the first company to manufacture the black SS uniform, and by 1938, they were also producing Wehrmacht uniforms. The company saw significant growth in the 30s, and by 1938 they had expanded their efforts into other areas of clothing and textiles. However, Hugo made sure to focus his strengths on the most lucrative market in the textile industry: military uniforms. As the company grew, Hugo made sure to employ workers he believed were devoted to the Nazi cause, but once the Second World War began, he employed forced laborers from conquered territory in prisons of war, most of whom were women from France and Poland. Thanks to the war, there was an astronomical increase in demand for military uniforms. This led Hugo to employ 140 slave workers. While the slaves' living conditions were supposedly better than the concentration camps, they still had it far worse than your regular workers. They were forced to meet quotas, and they were threatened to be sent to the concentration camps if they didn't keep up. After the war ended in a Nazi defeat, Hugo Boss was convicted on the charges of being an activist and beneficiary of the Nazi Party. However, during the post-war trials in 1946, Hugo appealed to not being an activist, but a mere supporter because of his company. His appeal was successful, but he was still banned from owning a business, so his son-in-law, Eugen Holy, took over the business. Hugo Boss eventually passed away on August 9, 1948, at the age of 63. The company took a massive blow after the World War and Hugo's denazification progress. However, things started improving when Eugen took over. By the year 1950, Hugo Boss had 128 employees, a number that continued to rise after they took their first order of men's suits. At the time, the demand for uniforms was almost non-existent. There was no war, and the Nazi Party, which was the company's main contractor, was disbanded. This led Eugen to steer his efforts towards something with a little more class that would satisfy Hugo Boss's target customers. So they went into the manufacture and supply of suits. In 1969, after a successful run at the head of the company, Eugen Holy retired and left the company to his two sons, Jochen and Uwe. The two brothers brought significant change to the company's sales and its image. They had an ambitious goal: to sell clothes internationally, a dream that was soon realized through different strategies in marketing. The brothers first began selling suits in a wider range of colors, then improved on the quality of their fabric by getting sturdy material made in Metzingen by textile makers Ganslin and Volter. While their suits may have been priced above average, they were cut in a youthful and more fashionable style than other German clothing brands. By the end of the 1970s, they were outperforming their German competition. Hugo Boss's high-quality suits made of Italian silk, linen, or cotton were different from the traditional German style. However, their cutting-edge designs, proper advertising, and product placement made the trendsetters among businessmen who sought styles that fit their roles. They were in vogue, and they were conquering Europe. Following their success in Europe, the brothers decided to cross the Atlantic and introduce their fine clothing to America. However, the brand was met with skepticism when it hit stores in the United States in 1976. As a quick response, the brothers introduced the Boss brand in 1977, and garnered popularity by making fit and handsome men like Sylvester Stallone the face of the brand. They also began sponsoring motorsports and Formula One racing to give the brand a bigger international presence. By 1980, the company had crossed the 100 million Deutschmark sales mark, about $51 million. Their brand represented the look of a successful professional with a touch of macho. By the mid-80s, the company had expanded to make cheaper and more affordable clothing for youngsters who couldn't afford their trademark clothing. The brothers also sought to make the company's image a little less associated with masculinity and diversify even further. So by 1984, the company had obtained a fragrance license, which led to the production of their first perfume product, Boss No. 1, which was a huge success. A year later, the company was listed on the German Stock Exchange, and a year after the initial public opening, Hugo Boss was worth more than the rest of the German men's clothing brands combined. By 1987, the company had grossed about $250 million a year, and almost $500 million by the end of the decade. At the end of the decade, in 1989, the Holy brothers sold the majority of their shares to a Japanese group known as the Leighton House Group. It was a lucrative deal for the brothers, as Hugo Boss was at the peak of its success. However, they had little say in the management of the company, so the trade marked the end of the Holy era at the helm of Hugo Boss. The 1990s marked the end of the yuppie era, characterized by flashy consumption and consumers moved towards more modest clothing. This could be thanks to the economic recession of 1992. Consumers had to cut back on expensive clothing. At the same time, personnel costs rose, and the Italian lira saw a marked increase of 20 to 30%, making Italian labor a lot cheaper than others. This meant a huge price advantage for Italian designers. The result? Hugo Boss's stocks traded at less than half the price they traded when the Holy brothers sold their shares. The company's new owners weren't going to watch their big investment go down the drain like that, so they employed someone experienced to steer the company at the front. They hired Peter Littman as the new CEO. The 46-year-old Czech then moved to add 2 additional labels besides the Boss brand to make a more sophisticated marketing approach, and also to soften the brand's bossy image. The first new brand was named Hugo, which dealt with making trendy fashion for young professionals. The second was named Baldessarini, after the company's chief designer. Its main purpose was to sell exclusive fashion to the financially independent who could afford the luxury. The 3-label idea became a huge success, and it was propelled further by Littman's idea to outsource labor to other countries. They were able to cut costs and maximize profits, despite recording low sales. Their profits jumped by 74% in 1994. Following many years of success, Hugo Boss has worked hard to shake off its history with Nazi Germany and its founding father. With expert marketing and sponsorship deals, it's convinced the world that it's a reliable brand for men in tune with their style and masculinity. However, many controversies still cloud the company's image, some of which are, of course, tied to its World War II history. For example, in 2013, during GQ magazine's Men of the Year award ceremony, popular comedian Russell Brand was thrown out of the aftershow for his remarks against Hugo Boss, who happened to be sponsoring the event. Brand said before the gathered celebrities and politicians that if anyone knew a bit about history and fashion, they'd know it was Hugo Boss that made uniforms for the Nazis. To add salt to the injury, he said with no subtlety whatsoever that they looked fantastic while they were killing people based on their religion and sexuality. But that wasn't all. Hugo Boss also recently took legal action against businesses and charities that use the word boss by sending cease and desist orders. For a company that makes an annual turnover of approximately $2.7 billion, that was quite the petty move. Hugo Boss's zeal to enforce their trademark against small businesses led the UK comedian Joe Lycett to legally change his name to Hugo Boss as a form of protest. The company did not respond with any legal action, but they still went on with disputes with smaller businesses. Disputes such as this are definitely not uncommon, but this particular dispute took a very comedic turn with the involvement of Joe Lycett, and it raised questions among many people. A brand that took advantage of the free labor of slaves and prisoners of war should definitely not be putting small businesses and charities at the point of ruin to keep their name. The brand Hugo Boss is shrouded in controversy. However, they're trusted to deliver high-quality fashion that transcends ages and trends. Whether they should be cancelled or not isn't something that can be properly answered. The brand has made its name across the globe, and it will pick itself up from the ashes again and again. You, however, can decide if you want to keep supporting them and wearing their style, or boycott them in the name of justice. Thank you for watching the video so far. Until the next one, ciao.